But the thing that I find most striking is the enormous, remarkable capability of virtually every small child for learning. They start out eager, intellectually wide-eyed, asking extremely clever questions about the world, and then something happens, by and large, to discourage them. And I think it's a tremendous waste of natural resources. For example, a kid asks, "Mommy, why is the grass green?" And very often you get an answer like, "Oh, don't ask dumb questions," or "who knows," when in fact it's an extremely profound question. And how much better would it be?
Why is the sky blue, or anything like that?
In both those cases, it goes to the fundamentals, in one case of biology, in the other of a kind of physics. How much better it would be to say to the child, "That's a good question, Johnny. I don't know the answer. Maybe we can look it up." Or, "Nobody knows. Maybe when you grow up, you'll be the person to find out." I think kids who are discouraged from asking those questions wind up learning the lesson that there's something bad about using the mind, and we lose resources. And we need those intellectual resources because we are in very perilous times. And I think the complex and subtle problems that we face can only have complex and subtle solutions. Right. And we need people able to think complex and subtle thoughts. And I believe a great many children have that capability if only they're encouraged.
Every newspaper in America, with very few exceptions, has a daily astrology column. Astrology is bunk. Astrology is fraud. How many of them have even a weekly science column? Why that disproportion? How much real science is there on?
Well, they say they're giving them, that's what the networks all say. We're just giving the American people what they want.
And that, you know,
and we're dragging ourselves down and down and down over the last 40 years. I know, I mean, I've seen it.
It is important for us, humans, to be out there. And the reasons are, I can quickly say what they are. First is, we are an exploratory species. The last 10,000 years, we've been sitting around in civilization. Before that, for the last few 100,000 years, we were wanderers, explorers, nomads, and that is in our blood. And spaceflight is an opportunity, the only one open to us, to continue that long human tradition. Secondly, that technology I was talking about can pose a danger to ourselves. We inhabit a very thin protective atmosphere. Our technology can destroy that environment that protects us. I don't for a moment say that the Earth is a disposable planet. We have to make the most heroic efforts to preserve it and us. But I still think it would be a good insurance policy, hedging our bets, or as Republicans like to say, diversifying our portfolios, for there to be humans on other worlds as well as here. And finally, there's a specific identifiable hazard that, again, not in 10 years, but in hundreds or thousands starts to become worrisome. And that is that the Earth will be hit by a large asteroid or comet, and if we're ever going to deal with that, we have to be in space. Put all that together, and I see on a time scale of decades to centuries, we really have to have a significant presence in space. The space program languish in the last 10 or 15 years, as we have let all sorts of social programs languish, as we have permitted the amount of poverty in children to increase. Before the end of this century, more than half the kids in America may be below the poverty line. What kind of a future do we build for the country if we raise all these kids as disadvantaged, as unable to cope with the society, as resentful for the injustice served up to them? This is stupid.
And then what happened with the resources is they went into increasing budgets for arms. Isn't that where the money went?
That and making rich people richer. Those are the two places.
Well, the thing about rich people, and being one, I guess, is the money all gets reinvested. If you've got money, you put it in a bank. The bank lends it out to people to buy homes or cars or whatever.
Not poor people. But not poor people.
Well, that's a good point.
It tends to stay up at that highly stratified, very...
More people get employed with capital formation and so forth. Are you a socialist?
I'm not sure what a socialist is,
well,
but I believe that the government has a responsibility to care for the people. And I'm not talking about dole. I'm talking about making people self-reliant, people able to take care of themselves. There are countries which are perfectly able to do that. The United States is an extremely rich country. It's perfectly able to do that. It chooses not to. It chooses to have homeless people. We are 19th in the world in infant mortality. 18 other countries save the lives of their babies better than we. How come? They just spend more money on it. They care about their babies more than we care about ours. I think it's a disgrace.
Well, there's two ways. One is it's enormous gravity. A black hole is a place where the gravity is so intense that even light can't get out, so it's completely dark. But if it's revolving around some other object that is shining, then by the gravitational tugs that the black hole makes on this other star, you can detect its presence. And another thing that happens is that black holes tend to have disks of matter surrounding them in which the friction generates X-rays. And one of the candidate black holes, something called Cygnus X1, both does this gravitational pull and is a source of X-rays, and very likely is an example of the legendary black hole.
Yeah, then there was the theory that once you enter a black hole, you could go into another universe or to another time frame. I suppose that's science fiction so far?
Well, there are some people who seriously think that if you were to slip down into a black hole and could survive the trip, which is highly unlikely, that you would emerge somewhere else in space and some when else in time.
Yeah. Global warming, the greenhouse effect. You put gases like carbon dioxide or CFCs, other greenhouse gases, into the atmosphere over this country. They don't stay over that country. Those molecules don't have passports. They don't know about national sovereignty. That's something they never heard of. The atmospheric circulation spreads those gases all over the planet. And so what one country does affects all the other countries. The solution to these kinds of problems has to be that everybody on Earth works together. The industrialized nations have the biggest responsibility because they're the biggest polluters. The United States puts more CO2 in the atmosphere than any other nation. But Western Europe and the Soviet Union and Japan and even the developing countries all make significant contributions. So there has to be a new way of looking at the future, and that is that we're all humans, members of the same species, on one fragile little planet. We're all in this together, and we have to work together. That's kind of the silver lining of these crises. They are forcing us to become a planetary species.
I think that's very important, the idea that we have information stored outside of our bodies. For most of the history of life on this planet, the organisms had almost all the information they had to deal with in their genes, hereditary information, instinct. Then about maybe 100 million years ago, a little longer ago than that, there came to be a reptile that for the first time in the history of life had more information in its brains than in its genes. And that was a major step symbolically in the evolution of life on this planet. Well, now we have an organism, us, which can store more information outside the body altogether than inside the body, and that's in books and computers and television video cassettes. And that extraordinarily expands our ability to understand what's happening and to manipulate, control our environment if we do it wisely for human benefit. The whole idea of what happens when you read a book I find absolutely stunning. Here's some product of a tree with little black squiggles on it. Right. You open it up, and inside your head is the voice of someone speaking who may have been dead 3,000 years. And yet there he is talking directly to you. What a magical thing that is.
Do you think that there's life anywhere else in the universe?
Well, think is a strong word. If you look at how many other worlds there are, how many stars in the Milky Way galaxy, how likely it is that most of them most of them have planets, how many other galaxies there are, it seems the height of human arrogance to imagine that this planet is the only inhabited world. But at the same time, we don't know of life elsewhere yet. We're just at the very earliest stages of exploration, and we've not found life anywhere else. We've sent spacecraft, as I said before, to a wonderful, exquisite array of other worlds. We've learned an enormous amount from them. We find on some of them the chemicals necessary for the origin of life, the stirrings, the intimations of life, but no sign of life. We've also used big radio telescopes to see if anybody is sending us a radio message, and both of those efforts have not yet succeeded, so we haven't found life elsewhere. I would think a universe in which we are the only living things is much more incredible than a universe just burgeoning, overflowing with life. But we can't be sure. It's an experimental question. It has to be addressed experimentally. And that's one of the reasons that I'm such an advocate for sending spacecraft to other worlds and for using large radio telescopes to listen for signals.
It's an interesting question. Which organism would replace us if we wiped ourselves selectively out? An old professor of mine, H.J. Muller, geneticist, said he thought it was between the raccoons and the bears. And they're both very clever and do many different things. But my feeling is that the great apes, chimps, gorillas are so close to us already that they have a big head start if that were to happen. I hope it won't happen. And the way you guarantee that it doesn't happen is by using the kind of intelligence that nature has already given us.
Here's this spacecraft that has flown by the Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune systems.
Right.
Is on its way, astonishingly, to the stars, a triumph of human engineering. We turn the cameras back and take a photograph of the planet from where it came.
Yeah.
And we can barely see it. Here it is, a fragile, delicate, pale blue dot, and that's where we live. That's where every human has ever lived, and you can see the vulnerability at a glance. And that gives a humbling and I think character-building sense of where we are.
Humbling because it says that we're only one small portion of something that is enormously large.
Absolutely. And let me say a word about what that is. This dot is one of 9 planets that goes around a humdrum star that lives at the outskirts of a perfectly ordinary galaxy, which is composed of 400 billion other stars in a universe of maybe 100 billion galaxies. Yeah. And recent thoughts suggest this universe one of a very large number, perhaps an infinite number of other closed-off universes. Yeah. In that context, what is the chance that we are the center or the point of the universe?